The war veteran had spent most of the morning sitting alone on the worn bench outside the ticket counter at LAX, his back aching in that familiar, persistent way it had since the fall of 2004, when the Humvee flipped and shrapnel took the better part of his shoulder. He clutched his folded paper ticket tightly, purchased with the last of his disability check and what little he could scrape together from pawning his old watch and a pair of medals he hadn't looked at in over a decade. It was a quiet desperation masked as routine, a trip he told no one about. Just a one-way flight to Milwaukee, where his estranged daughter might still be living. A place he hadn't seen since the divorce. The airport was buzzing, all glossy tiles and chattering passengers in overpriced sneakers, and he stood out like a misplaced extra in someone else's movie. Creased coat, boots that had seen sand and blood, and a heavy rucksack that still smelled faintly of oil and dust. When his number was called, he approached the counter slowly, his ID already in hand, and the young woman behind the glass barely looked up. Her nails clicked against the keyboard as she tapped something in, frowned for a split second, then handed him a boarding pass without meeting his eyes. He didn't notice anything odd, not really. He was tired, and the letters on the ticket swam slightly under his fingers. Terminal 4, Gate 32. He made his way there with the same quiet, limping rhythm he carried through life. Never fast, never dramatic. Just forward. He didn't check the seat number. He didn't know he'd been handed the wrong flight altogether. He only saw Milwaukee and trusted the rest. The gate was crowded, and he waited by the windows, watching the planes come and go with the detached gaze of someone who'd spent more time in the sky than most civilians would ever understand. When boarding was announced, he moved with the last group, showing the pass to the scanner, nodding when the gate agent waved him through. No one stopped him. No one said a word. Inside the cabin, he found a window seat near the back and settled in slowly, breath catching slightly as his back made contact with the rigid upholstery. He looked out at the tarmac, the airport ground crew moving like ants under a fading sun, and for a moment, he let himself believe he'd made it. He'd boarded. He was on his way. He'd done it without help. A small, private victory. As the plane filled around him, with travelers lugging backpacks and headphones and steaming cups of coffee, no one paid much attention to the older man in the back. Just another passenger, just another flight. But that's never how it really works, is it? Because the second you start to feel like maybe, just maybe, things might finally line up, life has a way of reaching backward with a crooked finger. And it did. But not yet. Not right away. First, there was the engine hum, the overhead compartment snapping shut, the safety announcement beginning with cheerful indifference. He shifted in his seat, ignoring the pinch in his side and the tightness in his throat. He had a photo of his daughter in his breast pocket. He hadn't taken it out in years. He wouldn't today either. The engines whirred louder now, a low rumble underfoot. The plane began to move. Wheels against concrete. Movement. Forward. It almost felt real. Almost. Wait. Stay with this. What happens next isn't what you think, and it's worth it. He didn't notice the way the plane filled up because his eyes were locked on the tiny screen in front of him, the one built into the back of the seat, flickering advertisements for places he'd never afford. The flight was nearly ready to depart, passengers murmuring, settling in, and then it started. The quiet shuffle of shoes down the aisle as the flight attendant made her way through the cabin, her tablet in hand, stopping row by row, performing one of those final, routine ticket verification checks. She moved with efficient detachment, smiling in that flight attendant way that isn't really smiling, pausing at each row with a kind of practiced grace until she reached him. She asked for his boarding pass without looking directly at him, and when he handed it over, her fingers hesitated just a second too long on the paper, her smile vanished, and her eyebrows creased in a way that told him, he knew right then, something was about to go wrong. She looked back down at her tablet, then again at his pass, and said with a clipped, rehearsed voice that his ticket didn't match the manifest. She said it like a machine, flat, like he was a data error. He blinked slowly, uncertain if he'd misheard her, and quietly explained that he'd bought the ticket that morning at the airline counter, even showed the small credit card receipt folded in his wallet. She didn't care. She barely glanced at it. Sir, she said more firmly now, this ticket is invalid. You'll need to step off the aircraft. He stayed silent for a beat, trying to make sense of it, eyes scanning her expression, searching for any crack of understanding or even patience. But she was already gesturing to another flight attendant farther down the aisle. We need to remove this passenger, she called, loud enough for the rows ahead to hear. He felt it like a slap. The air changed. Heads turned. A man in 28 Celsius raised his eyebrows. Someone reached for their phone. Remove? He repeated softly, his voice nearly drowned by the background buzz. Ma'am, I paid for that seat. I gave them everything I had left this morning. That's my seat. But she didn't listen. Sir, please don't make this more difficult, she said, now with a tone that turned him from a confused customer into a potential threat. Either exit the plane now or we will request assistance. Assistance, he echoed. Ma'am, I'm not doing anything. I'm not shouting. I'm not refusing anything. I just want to sit in the seat I paid for. His hand tightened on the armrest. The pressure behind his eyes felt like it was building, and yet her expression remained cold, calculated, empty. Security is already on their way, she added. If you remain seated, you'll be escorted out. He stared at her, then at the other passengers, who suddenly found the floor very interesting, or the window, or the silent void of their screens. He waited, hoping someone might say something, anything, but the silence spread like fog. He felt himself swallow hard. He hadn't been treated like this even in places where he carried a weapon and wore body armor. There was more decency in war zones than what he was being shown right now, 35,000 feet closer to home. Then, two security officers arrived at the front of the cabin and began walking toward him, slow, deliberate, with the kind of stance that expected resistance, the same way they walked in grocery stores when a teenager tried to steal alcohol. You want me off this plane, he said quietly to the flight attendant, almost asking a question. After everything I gave to this country, after everything I lost. His voice wasn't trembling, but it was close. And not one of you will even double-check that ticket. Sir, the officer said now, reaching out a hand, we need to ask you to come with us. I'm not going anywhere, he answered, not loud, but with a kind of steel that made the air tense. I paid. I followed the rules. I'm not leaving until someone actually looks at what I was given. The officer's voice shifted, more firm now. Sir, if you do not comply, we will be forced to remove you. You want to drag a war veteran off a plane in front of families and kids because a clerk gave him the wrong ticket format? His voice rose a notch now, not angry, but deeply tired. You don't even want to check if it's the airline's mistake. The silence was brutal. One of the security men looked unsure now, shifting his weight slightly, but the other one stayed firm. We're just following policy, he said. Please cooperate. Policy, the veteran muttered. That's the word now. Always policy. Never judgment. Never accountability. Just press the buttons you're told to press. One officer stepped closer. He knew what came next. He'd seen this pattern before, just never from the other side. He stood slowly, not resisting, not arguing anymore, just rising like a man who knew there was no one left to convince. His knees cracked. He adjusted the strap on his worn bag. The flight attendant didn't meet his eyes. Neither did anyone else. He began walking toward the front of the aircraft with the two officers flanking him. The aisle seemed longer than it did when he boarded. Passengers pulled in their elbows and stared at the seats in front of them like statues. Not one voice broke the silence. Not one. And here's where you think the story ends, don't you? Here's where you think he gets walked out and disappears. Another forgotten man brushed aside by a system too indifferent to notice. But stay with this, because something is coming. Something small, maybe, but real. The kind of moment most people don't expect anymore. Because the thing about injustice is, sometimes, just sometimes, someone actually sees it. And when they do, really sees it, they can't look away. This isn't just about a man and a seat. It never was. Keep watching. You'll see. The veteran remained seated near gate 32 long, after most of the people had cleared out. his boarding pass still in his hand, his bag at his feet like some loyal, weathered dog. He looked like he hadn't moved in 20 minutes, maybe more, just sitting there with his back straight but eyes unfocused, like the body was obeying muscle memory, but the mind was elsewhere, spiraling quietly inside. That's when the captain stepped into view, not hurrying, not flustered, just walking with the quiet confidence of a man who knew what he stood for. He had heard enough to know something wasn't right. Hadn't yet entered the cockpit when he saw the tail end of the scene unfolding, the veteran being walked out like some rule breaker or threat, and something about it didn't sit right. So he did what men like him do when something doesn't sit right. He got up and went toward it. He found the veteran sitting there, eyes hollow but defiant, and asked what happened in a tone that didn't offer pity or apology, just space. The veteran explained what he'd been through. The ticket bought at the counter, the woman who didn't even look twice, the humiliation of being escorted off in front of a silent cabin, and handed over the crumpled paper. The captain took one glance at the ticket and stopped cold. There, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was the government fare code, a designation meant for veterans under a special DVA agreement, rarely used, often misunderstood, but very real. It was a fully valid seat, purchased with a discount authorized by a federal program, not fake, not fraudulent, not unearned. The captain's face changed only slightly, just enough to signal that something had clicked. He handed the ticket back, thanked the veteran quietly, and walked away without another word. What happened next wasn't loud. No shouting, no banging on desks, no headlines. But it was precise, sharp, and final. The captain boarded the plane again, made his way directly to the flight crew, and requested a private word. Within minutes, changes began behind the scenes. The flight was delayed, not for weather, not for maintenance, but because the captain refused to fly with a crew that had mishandled a veteran and disrespected the protocols that were in place for cases exactly like this. The stewardess who dismissed the man, reassigned, pulled from the aircraft and replaced without ceremony. The security staff who hadn't checked the pass, who hadn't even considered verifying the code before laying hands on him, replaced as well. All of this was handled with calm professionalism, but it moved like a current under the surface. There were no announcements about the real reason, no memos shared with passengers. But inside the walls of the terminal and cabin, something was shifting. People noticed. Passengers had filmed parts of the initial event. One short video clip, just 13 seconds long, showed the veteran being walked off the plane, the stewardess ignoring him, and the captain watching silently from the cockpit door before turning and following. That clip hit social media 20 minutes before the plane took off again, and within an hour it was viral. The caption read, "He just wanted his seat." By the time the aircraft reached cruising altitude, people across the country were already demanding answers. But back in the cabin, the captain had returned to the gate, walked through security again, and came back for the veteran personally. No dramatics. He picked up the duffel bag with one hand, gently placed the boarding pass in the veteran's palm, and said only, "Let's try this again." That was it. The two men walked side by side through the jet bridge, quiet but resolute. No one applauded, no one cheered, but the mood on board had changed. The ones who had seen him removed now shifted uncomfortably. Some made eye contact and looked away. Others simply bowed their heads. He sat back down in 27A, the same spot, but this time no one questioned him. He placed the bag beneath the seat, looked out the window as the city lights flickered like distant memories, and for the first time in a long while, exhaled with something close to relief. The engines roared, the wheels lifted, and the plane climbed steadily into the sky. No words were needed. But here's what you need to understand. This wasn't just a seat. This wasn't about one flight, one stewardess, one captain. This was about something people forgot how to name. A sense of worth not tied to money or image, but to sacrifice. And while most would see this as a small act of justice corrected, Those who paid attention knew it wasn't over. The video kept spreading. News outlets began piecing together the story. The airline issued a vague statement late that evening saying they were reviewing the circumstances. But the internet had already taken hold. Veterans groups reposted the video with their own captions. People began tagging politicians. It became a conversation, not about policy, not about rights, but about memory, dignity, and how easily we forget who we owe. But it doesn't stop there. Somewhere in the background, emails started to circulate. A foundation executive saw the clip. A journalist asked for names. A retired general recognized the face in the video and called in a favor. Things began to shift, quietly, unevenly, but shift they did. And this man, this tired, quiet man who had nearly been erased from a seat he'd paid for, found himself at the center of something bigger than a single mistake. This story, the one you're still watching unfold, isn't just about humiliation. It's about recognition, about how far someone must be pushed before someone else decides to pull them back. You thought this was over when he sat down again. But that's not how real stories work. The ones worth telling keep going, even after the plane lands. And this one's just lifting off.